I think with people, and on the occasion of this talk, ooh, is this working? No? There we go. No. It's not working. There we go. I have thought either directly or indirectly with these people who I'm implicating on screen. Some of it's via conversations online, primarily on Twitter. Some of it's face-to-face. In particular, I want to single out Mr. Lorri, who is in the audience, and with whom I will be doing a workshop later. And I've been partnering this year in a variety of work with Lorri, and his thoughts are shot through a lot of my thinking here. I want to thank Carrie. This is my digital capability. So it's not working with this anymore, just for the record. Let me see. Thank you, Carrie, for being brave enough to invite me. And I also want to single out this person here, my daughter, who is 17. And she's going to university next year. She grew up in the American school system, one where standardized testing rules. She has been tested beyond an inch of her life. She's been labeled a variety of things, and she's had her notions of success very tightly tied to very particular kinds of tests. The PSAT, the SAT, the ACT. Some of these tests have started coming over here, and some of your school students are starting to think about these, in addition to their GCSEs and their A-levels, et cetera, et cetera. She's also taken classes associated with tests, advanced placement, AP, and International Baccalaureate, IB, for a very long time. And she does really well on tests. And she will tell you this after she's actually taken the test. But before she takes the test, she thinks it's going to be a horrible disaster because she's also a perfectionist. She doesn't get that from me. The fact that she does well on tests is not the point. I see time and again the experiences she has in classes reduced to, how am I going to do on the test? We are surrounded by tests. They're used in the workplace and in professional development situations. I'll just do it from here.
Yeah, it's up and down.
Up and down? All right. So, who's taken this one? Big five. Nope. It's okay. I'll do it from here. Who's done this? Yeah. I didn't do this one, but I remember Cosmo quizzes on paper, right? You'd sit around and do them. I have floated the idea of actually doing a workshop where I just get a bunch of women's magazine quizzes and put a different quiz on each table and have people do it and then say, so how would you apply those results in your work life? My 17-year-old pointed me to the BuzzFeed quizzes. I don't even know where to start with this one. This is the first one my 17-year-old pointed me to. What type of grilled cheese are you? Mom, you've got to see this. I can't believe they made a quiz out of this. I couldn't believe they made a quiz out of it either. Then she insisted I take it. I don't know what that is, but that's not what I eat when I eat grilled cheese sandwiches. Funfetti grilled cheese. I will point out that Lorri took the test, and those of you who know him know that he is a vegetarian. Would you like to tell the people what your result was?
I do not want bacon.
He got bacon grilled cheese, right? So my daughter says to me, because I know how she feels about tests, and I said, what are you doing spending your spare time taking tests on the internet? And she said, sometimes it's fun to think about what kind of grilled cheese sandwich you are. And yeah, those are fun. I had fun. Where it ceases to be fun is when decisions get made on your behalf because of the results. Frameworks and quizzes and diagnostics, I do like to call these the Cosmo quiz school of professional development, encourage people to decide what type they are, to explain why they're doing things, and it gives an easy end run around organizational, structural, cultural circumstances that actually inform the reasons that people do things. So you don't have to, or I don't think you should, attribute individual motivations to some of the reasons that people are doing things. Because when you say to an individual, this is the kind of person you are, this is why you're doing things this way, then if there are problems, it is up to that individual person to fix it. Anyone work in libraries? Seen this? Yeah. So I'm going to refer to my colleague Kevin Sieber's very, very excellent critique of the CRAP checklist. But this is the checklist approach to information literacy, right? And it's pitched as an easy way to hand something to undergraduates to give them a sense of whether or not a piece of information is reliable. Check the currency. Check the relevance. Is it authoritative? Is it accurate? What's the purpose? So there's this idea that they can figure out what good information is and what is bad by using a checklist like this. This is a skills approach to critical thinking. And I am not the first person to point out that it's not effective. And people who are better at this than I am have pointed it out at length. And again, I'll point you to Kevin's post. There are structurally similar arguments being made around academic literacies generally, including student writing. There is a concern about the risks of reducing the notion of what we need people to do during and after their time in institutions, educational institutions, to skills. And this slide is a tiny literature review that reflects the thinking and reading I did just for this part of the talk. And I'm going to walk you briefly through it. But primarily, this is to say that what I'm critiquing are deficit models, wherein people are framed as lacking from the beginning, and where the fix is more of something, more information, more skills, and so on. And you can see from these references that such critiques predate this talk by a long shot. This isn't even the earliest reference, but the Elton reference was brought to me via the second reference, Lee and Street, 2006. Lee and Street wanted educators to be concerned with the processes of meaning making and contestation around meaning rather than skills or deficits. That's a quote. Their article is specifically about academic writing. But the points they make cross-cut a lot of pedagogical discussions in higher and further education. And like my colleague Eamon Tewell here, who just presented on this very recently, they argue for a model of education that's about the social acquisition of academic practices, rather than the accumulation of skills off of a checklist or a certain amount of content or information. My colleague Jason Davies at UCL alerted me to the anthropologist Mary Douglas's short book, How Institutions Think. And I was a little abashed because I am an anthropologist and I know Mary Douglas's work, but I haven't read this in a really long time and I'd forgotten about it. It's actually a series of lectures that she gave. And her points in particular that institutions, and it's worth remembering this because sometimes we lose that, institutions are socially and culturally constructed, and they themselves structure knowledge and identity. So universities are institutions. They're shot through with the structures of society, with social inequality, with racism, with sexism, with classism. And Douglas notes that analogies and labels wielded by institutions are representations of patterns of authority. So when we, in institutional contexts, sit our students and staff down and ask them to take a test or go through a diagnostic tool that gives them a profile, we think we're just trying to make things clear for them. It is often pitched as this is a tool that is going to help you understand what you're doing and why. Douglas's analysis gives us a way to frame these activities in terms of reinforcing current structural inequalities and assigning categories that limit people and their potential. When institutions do the classifying, it de-emphasizes individual agency and furthermore suggests that the institutional take on individuals is the important one that determines future success, which again is defined institutionally. So I want to draw a line from quiz-type testing that offers people an opportunity to profile themselves and the problematics of reducing knowledge work to a list of skills. And I also want to draw attention to the risks into which we put our students and staff if we use these profiles to predict, limit, or otherwise determine what might be possible for them in the future. So, use this carefully. Chris Gilliard and his colleague Hugh Kulik, and also the work of Sophia Noble, Algorithms of Oppression, both of these works are there as cautions about the ways in which digital structures reproduce and amplify inequality. Technology is not neutral. The digital tools, platforms, and places with which we engage, online and off, are made by people and informed by our society and all of the biases therein. I want you to think about the connotations of the word profile. If you have a profile, that's something that suggests that people know who you are and are predicting your behavior. We profile criminals. We profile suspects. People are unjustly profiled at border crossings because of the color of their skin, their accent, and their dress. Profiles are the bread and butter of what Chris Gilliard calls digital redlining, a set of educational policies, investment decisions, and IT practices that actively create and maintain class boundaries through strictures that discriminate against specific groups, end quote. The definitions of identity that emerge from institutions homogenize. They erase difference. They gatekeep. This is the nature of institutions. Our role as educators should be to remove barriers from our students and ourselves, not give them more barriers. Teaching and learning is not a problem to be solved. They are processes in which we engage. So you may not intend these terms to be switches that are perceived to be on and off, but the opposite of digitally capable is digitally incapable. The opposite of digital literacy is digital illiteracy. They are binary states. That's built into the language we use, and when we say these things, we need to think carefully about what we're saying to our students. So early in my time doing work in libraries, and I've been working in libraries since 2009, I was tasked with some web usability testing. Who here's done web UX work? Yeah. So, it's task lists, it's reporting on the efficacy of web environments, and it was clear to me in the work that I was doing that people didn't sit down to a website and say, I'm a first-year student and I'm using this website. They sat down and they said, I'm writing a paper and I need to find resources. So I was really perplexed at the use of personas in web UX because in the course of my research, I saw people making meaning of their encounters with the web based on the things they wanted and needed to do, far less than who they were. So what I was told when I asked was that personas, and I've pulled this from a site that offers to construct personas, personas are useful to have in meetings where you need to prove that users are people. When UX uses personas to frame our testing of websites, we have capitulated to a system that is already disassociated from people and all of their human complexity. The utility of personas, and I'm not denying that they're useful, but their utility is a symptom of the lack of control that libraries and librarians have over the systems they use. How absurd to have to make the argument that these websites and databases will be used by people. The insidious effect of persona-based arguments is to further limit what we think people are likely to do as particular categories. Are first-year students going to do research? Do undergraduates need to know about interlibrary lending? Do members of academic staff need to know how to contact a librarian? Why or why not? If we had task-based organizing structures on our websites, it wouldn't matter who was using them. It would matter far more what they're trying to do. And what I've found in my more recent work as someone who's brought into various HE and FE contexts to help people reflect on and develop their personal and professional practices is that metaphors, like the ones on this slide, go very easily into labels, into ways that people identify themselves within the metaphors. So people have been primed by these quizzes that I called out earlier. I'm ENTJ. I'm 40, but my social media age is 16. I'm a funfetti cheese sandwich. Oh my God. I've spent a lot of time in workshops trying to manage people's anxieties around what they think these metaphors say about them as people. They apologize for their practice. Oh, I'm not resident on Twitter. I'm so sorry. They can read the judgments that are embedded in these metaphors, no matter how hard we try to argue that they're not judgmental. And I am complicit in the visitors and residents metaphor. I've been working with that structure for a very long time. And I got to a point where I was really tired of witnessing people apologizing for their practices because they thought that these metaphors were judging them. We still had people deciding that they were more or less capable depending on what label they felt fit them. I can't do that online conference because I'm not resident on Twitter. I can't learn how to use that technology because I'm just an immigrant. So we need to move away from deficit models of digital capabilities that start with pigeonholing people based on questionnaire results. What are we doing when we encourage people to diagnose themselves, to categorize themselves with these tools? The underlying message is that they are a problem that needs to be fixed. And the fixes will be determined after the results of the questionnaire come in. The message is that who they are determines how capable they are. The message is that there might be limits on their capabilities based on who they are. The message is that we in the institution need to spend labor determining who people are before we can offer them help, rather than, just spitballing here, making it easy for people to access the resources they need and allow themselves to define themselves, for their identity to emerge within their practice from their own definitions of self rather than our imposed notions. So in anthropology, there's some useful jargon occasionally. And we have these words, emic and edic. Who knows these words already? You do? Excellent. Some people know these words. So anthropologists traditionally are outsiders going into other cultures to learn about this culture. Now, that has become more complicated. Now you have people within cultures doing sort of analysis of the place that they come from. But there is a sense of outside and inside embedded in the discipline historically. So when we talk about categories of meaning, we make a distinction between emic categories, which are the ones that emerge from the people themselves. These are the categories that they define as being meaningful, and this is the unit of analysis that they use to make meaning of their own practices. Edic categories are those that are imposed from the outside. They're the ones that the anthropologist might use. So a good example of an edic category would be kinship terms based on biological relation rather than the cultural meaning of kinship terms. So the difference between the anthropologist who goes in and says, this person is blood related to this person, XYZ, doing that regardless of what people say is their family group, right? This is the difference between emic and edic. Does that make sense? It's been a while since I've done intro-anthro lectures. So what all of these, who are you, here's what we have for you setups in institutions do, these emerge from edic categories. Those are imposed from the outside. You are a transfer student. You are a first-gen student. You are a BAME student. You are a digital native. What if we valued the emic categories, the ways that students define themselves? What if we allowed their definition of self to emerge from the circumstances that we provide for them while at university, for the processes they engage to be self-directed but also scaffolded with the help, with the resources, the mentoring, the guidance of people who make up the university? That sounds like education to me. The other thing is sorting. If you decide that students are capable or incapable based on who they are and point them to resources based on that edic categorization of people, you are sorting them. You are not educating them. The history of anthropology tells us that categorizing people is lesser than understanding them. The colonial practices of anthropology were interested in typologies of humans. There is also a strand of anthropology that says it's important to understand humans. Colonial practices were in the service of empire, and anthropology facilitated and continues in some circumstances to facilitate that work. It shouldn't anymore, and it doesn't have to now. You don't need to compile a typology of your students or staff. You need to engage with them. So those of you who are coming to the workshop later will see this again. This is emerging from work that Lorri Phipps and I have done this year around digital practice mapping. And what we've been trying to do is move away from this idea that who you are is more important than what you do. And so we've tried to come up with a map that simply allows people to get stuck into their practice and to think about categories of practice regardless of who they are. So once we do this and we have people start to put things down, so the inside of the triangle is all of the stuff that's bounded by institutional systems. The outside is all of the stuff that is more sort of open practice. And then once people sort of map that out, then we can start to have a conversation about their motivations. I think this is a possible way of getting out of the classification game. We've used this tool. We found in a workshop context that we didn't have to have those who am I, what am I doing it right conversations. People get far less concerned about labels when we do a sort of practice-based mapping like this. So I think we need to, as a sector, start with people's practices, recognize their practice as effective for them in certain contexts, and then ask them what they want to do. I'm not interested in giving them categories. Those are barriers. Who they are isn't what they can do. We need to stop profiling people. So when you're asking your students questions, perhaps it shouldn't be in a survey. When you're trying to figure out how to help students, why not assume that all of the resources you provide should be seen as available to everyone, not just the ones with identifiable need? The reason deficit models persist is not a pedagogical one. It's a political one. The reason we're trying to figure out who really needs help, rather than assuming that we can and should help everyone, is that resources are decreasing overall. The political climate is one that's defunding universities. State money no longer supports higher education the way it used to, and widening participation is slowing down because we are asking individual students to fund their education rather than taking on the education of our citizens as a collective responsibility that will yield collective benefits. These diagnostic tools are in service of facilitating that defunding. We target resources when there are not enough of them. We talk about efficiency when we can no longer talk about effectiveness. We think we can do a shortcut to effectiveness by pre-identifying which students need help, which students need guidance, which students need chances to explore things they don't already know. They all need help. They all deserve an education. The important gaps are the ones between what we as institutions provide and what our students need. I am happy to entertain questions. Carrie, how do you want to do this? You want me to moderate? Okay. Francis.
What relationship do you see?
Yeah, Mike's.
Speaking as somebody outside this community, I can ask the difficult question, I think.
Sure.
What relationship, not difficult for you, but what relationship do you see between what you've described and the growth of digital technology in education?
Which piece?
Well, the sort of issues of targeting resources and profiling and categorization.
So I think that the proliferation of systems that institutions can buy is definitely a result of market forces that want you to think in terms of your students and the results of what students do as products. So it's insidious, right? Because vendors will frame it as if you care about your students, you will buy this system so that then you can inform your students about what they're doing. But then to be able to input students into the system, you might need to categorize them so that you can more effectively, right? So this is the notion of profiling. And these are LMSs, these are advising softwares, there's lots of different products. So yeah, I think that the fact that there are products that people are trying to sell institutions and that there's a lot of money at stake with these systems has an effect on how many people are making arguments for the efficacy of these systems. Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions for Donna? Comments even? Donna, I was interested to, just a question about, oh, there's one over there, but just a question about your saying about profiling. So one of the things that we do, and we've talked about a lot at the conference over the years, is about digital capability frameworks.
Yep.
Lists of things that we want people to do.
Yep.
How do you feel about those? Do you think they're helpful or unhelpful?
So I think motives matter. I think there's a difference between these are the things that we want our students to be able to do after they leave us versus these are the things that we think they're capable of now. Because these are the things we think they're capable of now comes usually with and then this is the gap between where we want them, where they are and where we want them to be, right? Again, it's that sort of deficit model. But if you sort of collectively hold the sense of, these are our priorities for our students, right? We want to give them the space such that they have practice with these skills. We want to give them space so that they are put in touch with this range of capacities and that they're given a chance to do these things. That's a really different thing. So I don't think it's that you shouldn't have goals. I just think it's that the framing could more constructively be, this is what our students come away with, regardless of where they started from, right?
Hiya, I'm Jenny. I'm from the University of Manchester Library. I'm also from the US, so it's nice to hear another American accent occasionally. Our library does a lot of work in supporting students with the skills they need to succeed at university.
Mhm.
And one thing that we often hear is that, well, we can't send our students there, it's remedial.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, which is problematic anyway.
Yeah.
I guess I was wondering most where, besides throwing something at them, you start the response to that kind of statement. Because we've done a lot of work. We have an impact study that actually shows there's a correlation between attending our our workshops and doing better. We never speak about it with a deficit model ourselves, but we do have a significant barrier, especially in certain faculties, where the immediate response is no. Seeking help is for those who struggle.
Yeah.
And just wondering where to start.
So I do feel like throwing things is a really legitimate response to that sort of thing. So the place where you have those difficult conversations with academics is in the relationships that you build with them, right? So I think that it's great that you don't approach these things as remedial. And there definitely is a culture in academic departments, some academic departments, about, these are skills that my students should have shown up, my students should be able to write already, my students should be able to college already, my students should be able to do all these things. If they can't do it, I'm not going to teach them how to write. I just need them to write a paper. So a couple of things. I know that at my own institution at UNC Charlotte, there is a critical mass of faculty who don't think that, and who do an awful lot to take on the responsibility of teaching their students the things that they need them to learn, that they will need at university generally, and not just for their class. So you find your friendlies and work with them, and I'm sure you guys are already doing that. The other thing that I would do is identify cross-departmental bodies. So the library is one. We at UNC Charlotte had a communication across the curriculum office that was interested in talking about writing at university, independent of department. So we had people in engineering, we had people in English, we had people in anthropology, we had people in biology, collectively taking on the work of how do we make sure that students get practice with writing from the beginning before we're asking them to do a dissertation or a thesis. So that we're not, several years into the degree and throwing our hands up and saying, why don't they know how to write? It takes work. You guys are already probably doing the work that you do. Sometimes I just ask people with PhDs, well, when did you learn how to write? Who taught you how to write? Don't you think maybe you could be that person for your student? There's no easy, Mike, here? Yes.
Hello, is this working? Good.
Yes, it is, yeah.
Jason from the University of Plymouth. Talked about a couple of interesting themes already. So the idea of having a core skill set and how do we bring everybody up to that kind of level, when they graduate and leave the university. You've mentioned let's not profile people, but I wondered about the role of individual profiling and personal pathways and where learning in predictive analytics might come into this to help identify individuals that are perhaps falling behind on attaining that skill set or part of it that they need.
I am never going to advocate for predictive analytics for our students. I think that it takes away important obligations that we have as institutions to connect with our students. I think that one of the most dangerous things we could do is outsource the human labor of advising and education to an analytics system. And I don't trust the systems. I don't trust them to have the care of our students at their core. And I worry about the effect that predictive analytics in particular has on students' sense of what might be possible. I understand that institutions who are strapped for cash might see these systems as a way to bridge the gap between the work that they want to do and the work that they're capable of doing, given the staff they have. I think it's dangerous.
Okay, we've got time for one more question, I think.
There was a question over here.
Hi, I was just wondering what you think about the JISC digital capability tool, because obviously that is, in a sense, partly profiling students around digital capabilities.
Yeah, and I have seen from the sessions that there's going to be a lot of discussion about the JISC digital capability tool. I should say that I am currently working with JISC and being paid by JISC money, but I'm not working on the digital capability tool. And frankly, I feel about any of those diagnostic tools the same, whether it's coming from JISC or whether it's coming from, you know, some commercial vendor. I question the utility of generating profiles based on stuff that looks like standardized tests. I wonder about the utility of that kind of test. What I've seen about the next phase of the digital capability project is more of what I'd like to see from the beginning. My impression of the work is that it's supposed to position people so that they can then start to think about connecting with the needs of students. I wish it didn't start with a survey.
Thank you, Donna.
Yes, I'm around for the rest of the day.
Fab. So,
I will be here for lunch. I understand that not everybody likes to ask questions in big forums like this, and that is completely fine. And if you want to grab me and ask me a question at any moment, I'm happy to talk.